today we're going to talk about grapevine phenology, distinctly different from the study of the cranium phrenology. There's a trivia answer for you in the future. So what is phenology? So phenology is the study of the cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena, especially in relation to climate and plant and animal life. Okay, so that's the Merriam-Webster definition. From our perspective as viticulturists, like in the industry, it's really just the growth stages of the grapevine. And of course, it's an ology, so people do study the growth stages of the grapevine in relation to climate and natural cycles, of course. All right. But oftentimes you'll hear me say things about phenology. I'll talk about like things being phenologically advanced, which means that the growth cycles are ahead in the year. Like say this year was phenologically advanced. It means that bud break, like flowering, veraison, harvest were ahead of normal, right? Why is the study of phenology important? So like I said, all of our cultural practices, like harvesting, like y'all said, we pull leaves a lot of times. And when we pull leaves, most of us do that kind of just after fruit set, in between fruit set and what we call lag phase, which I'll talk about today. Chemical practices as well. So when are we going to start spraying? So usually we start spraying in any system, organic or conventional system. We'll start spraying at about 3 to 6 inches of shoot growth. And then certain sprays will go on at critical times, right? So at 10% bloom, when 10% of the flowers have come out, then we're going to put on our most intense fungicides at that moment to take care of some major issues. And then, of course, labor and equipment and just logistical things on our farm, right? Labor is increasingly hard for folks to get these days. It's been an ongoing issue here in the United States for over a decade. It's been getting worse and worse. So now we need to really hone in on things and be able to plan better than we've ever had to, because we just don't have the same labor force we used to. Site and cultivar selection too, right? So I consult in the Kingdom of Bhutan. And we are creating the first ever wine industry in Bhutan, right? And so, like, knowing the climate and then knowing what I know about how plants respond to temperatures and such, and respond to the climate phenologically, I can then go and select vines that I reckon, or cultivars that I reckon would be more well suited to that new area. Right, and even vineyard design and layout is going to be something we want to consider, right? If we're in a cool region, maybe we want to advance phenology a bit. In that case, we probably don't want an east-facing slope. We probably want either south or southwest-facing, probably more southwest, right? So what drives phenology? Well, so phenology is really response to day length. So there are like photoreceptor proteins in the plant, and they're essentially measuring, they're not really measuring day length. Like plants don't have any sort of idea of time, right? Plants don't have watches. Time is an illusion, you know? So what plants are doing is they have photoreceptors, and they're measuring certain wavelengths essentially of light. And then those wavelengths of light, the time which they're exposed to those wavelengths changes as day length changes, okay? But then what really drives phenology, and the reason why phenology is different, say, like phenology for Riesling in the Finger Lakes would be different, the timing would be different here than, say, in Virginia, is because of things like temperature, right? Temperature is really the major push-pull of kind of seasonal differences in phenology. And then, of course, stresses as well, like water stress. All right. But yeah, so like in general, and if you have a warmer season than normal, then your phenology is going to hasten. And if you have a cooler season than normal, then it's going to slow down. So for instance, in Oregon, flowering of a grapevine generally occurs like mid-June in the North Willamette Valley. In 2011, it occurred like mid-July. So not great. Not great. It was a very, very cold year. And then our harvest was pushed out too. So our flowering was a month out, and then our harvest was also about a month out. So yeah. But yeah, and then so how plants are really doing this with the photoreceptors and all this stuff, we actually don't really know. This is still kind of a bit of a glass box, and or a bit of a black box, and we don't truly really know how those photoreceptors are working and truly driving phenology, but we do know that that's happening. All right. So yeah, like in tropical climates, because if you're in the like equatorial regions, because you get basically 12 hours of sunlight, 12 hours of darkness, and you don't get really any seasonal change, because unlike here in New York, if you live in the tropics, they live in an area that skips all the terrible seasons, right? Again, you don't need to live here. Break the cycle. Okay, live somewhere where the weather's nice. So yeah, but the vines really don't go dormant on their own because of that, right? They're not measuring the differences in wavelength, and so they just keep growing. So you got to force them into dormancy. So in Brazil, they do actually have their own wine industry. Moet Chandon, in fact, if you guys know the champagne brand, Moet Chandon has a sparkling wine house in Brazil. They're making pretty good sparkling wine there. And they do actually have cold areas in Brazil. It's not all of Brazil that doesn't go dormant. There are some areas up in the like more mountainous regions that do go into some sort of shorter dormancy. But still, a lot of the country does not go into dormancy, and you have to force it into dormancy. And they do it by defoliating the grapevine with machines, trying to put it into a water stress if they can, and then applying a plant growth regulator known as ethylene. The trade name for the PGR spray is called Ethifon. And so they let it go into some sort of forced dormancy for a month, 2 weeks to a month, and then they wake the vine up with another product called hydrogen cyanamide, and then you're able to get 2 crops in a season. Okay, there are more than 5 growth stages. Obviously, as science folks, we can break down the growth stages into a much finer scale than we do for research purposes. But for viticulturists, for practicing viticulturists, you really only break it down into 5. So we only ever really have to consider bud break, which is the first growth in the springtime when the shoots start to emerge, right? Bloom, which is when the flowers come out. And then right after bloom is fruit set, which is when the flowers have pollinated and now we have fruit. And then veraison, which is the onset of color change. All berries start as green, right? And then they change color either to like a translucent, like a yellow or like an orange, or they change, of course, into reds and blacks. And then they start to load sugar. And then harvest, right? That's when the fruit's ripe. And then dormancy, which is when the leaves fall off, and then we're left with brown canes. Okay. So, right, so this is the cycle of it, right? So it's bud break in the spring, then bloom, veraison, harvest, dormancy, so on and so forth as a farmer. And I will continue to do this over and over and over until I'm dead. Okay, so that's the sunny outlook of my life.